I stepped through the front door, my heart heavy with worries about my son Jake and his family. As I entered the living room, I froze at the sight before me. My husband Doug had our 8-year-old grandson Caleb pinned against the wall, his face contorted with rage. "Where's the money, you little thief?" Doug snarled, shaking Caleb roughly. "I know you stole it from my wallet." Caleb sobbed, his face streaked with tears. "I didn't take anything, Grandpa. I swear." "Doug, what are you doing?" I cried out, rushing over to pull him away from Caleb. "Have you lost your mind? He's just a child." Doug released his grip on Caleb, who ran to me and buried his face against my legs, trembling. I wrapped my arms around him protectively, shocked by my husband's uncharacteristic outburst. "Money's missing from my office," Doug said gruffly, avoiding my accusing stare, "and this little brat was snooping around in there earlier." "That doesn't mean Caleb took anything," I said firmly, stroking our grandson's hair to soothe him. "You know he would never steal from us." Doug's jaw clenched. "Well, the money didn't just disappear on its own. Someone in this house is a thief." My mind reeled as I tried to make sense of the situation. Jake and his wife Amber had always seemed like the perfect couple, doting parents to Caleb. What could have driven one of them to steal from us? Just then, the front door opened and Amber walked in, her pretty face etched with worry. "What's going on?" I heard shouting. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, Doug's furious expression, Caleb clinging to me and crying. I saw a flicker of fear cross her features before she masked it. "Doug, I need to talk to you," Amber said, her voice shaking slightly. "In private. It's important." I tensed, sensing that whatever she had to say would be the key to unraveling this painful mystery. After settling Caleb in the kitchen with a snack, I followed Doug and Amber to the back patio, bracing myself for the truth. Amber took a deep breath, twisting her hands nervously. "I know what happened to the missing money," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "It was me. I took it." Doug exploded. "You lying, thieving." "Let her explain," I cut him off sharply before turning to Amber. "Why would you do this? Steal from your own family?" She broke down, sobs racking her slender frame. "I'm so sorry," Amber choked out. "I never meant for it to go this far, but I'm in trouble, deep trouble." The story came out between gasping breaths and fresh tears. Amber had been hiding a serious gambling addiction, racking up massive debts in secret. Desperate to get money to pay off her bookies before Jake found out, she had resorted to pilfering cash from Doug's office for months. "Please, you can't tell Jake," she begged us. "It will destroy our marriage. I'll get help, I swear. Just give me a chance to make this right." I looked at Doug, seeing my own shock and disappointment mirrored in his eyes. Our once perfect family was crumbling before us, torn apart by Amber's deceit. Could we really keep such a devastating secret from our own son? My heart ached as I realized the impossible choice that lay ahead. No matter what we did next, someone would get hurt, and the scars left behind may never fully heal. The weight of Amber's confession hung heavy in the air as Doug and I sat across from her at the kitchen table. Her once carefully applied makeup was now smeared from crying, her eyes red and puffy. "How could you do this to Jake?" "To Caleb?" I asked, my voice thick with disappointment. "Your gambling addiction has put your entire family at risk." Amber flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I never meant for it to get this bad." "But," she whispered, "at first it was just a little money here and there. But then I started losing more than I could afford." Doug slammed his fist on the table, making us both jump. "And you thought stealing from me was the answer? Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" "I'm sorry," Amber sobbed. "I was desperate. The bookies were threatening me, saying they'd come after Jake and Caleb if I didn't pay up." A chill ran down my spine at the thought of my son and grandson in danger because of Amber's reckless behavior. How had she let things spiral so far out of control? "How much do you owe?" I asked, dreading the answer. Amber hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. $50,000, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Doug let out a low whistle. "Jesus Christ, Amber, that's more than Jake makes in a year. How the hell are you going to pay that back?" "I don't know," she said miserably. "But I have to try. I can't let Jake find out about this. It would destroy him." I felt a flare of anger at her words. "You should have thought of that before you started gambling away your family's future," I snapped. Amber's shoulders shook with fresh sobs. I know, but please, Tina. Doug, you can't tell Jake. I'm begging you. I exchanged a long look with my husband, seeing the conflict in his eyes. As much as we wanted to protect our son from the truth, we both knew that keeping Amber's secret would only make things worse in the long run. We can't lie to Jake, I said firmly. He deserves to know what's going on. Amber's face crumpled. Please, just give me a chance to fix this on my own. I'll do whatever it takes. Get a second job. Sell some of my things. I'll make it right, I swear. Doug shook his head. And what happens when the bookies come knocking on Jake's door demanding their money? Are you going to put your husband and child in danger to cover your own ass? No, of course not, Amber cried. I would never let that happen. But if Jake finds out, he'll leave me. I can't lose my family over this. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, despite my anger and disappointment. Addiction was a terrible disease, one that could make even the most loving person behave in unthinkable ways. You need help, Amber, I said gently. Professional help, and you need to come clean to Jake before things get any worse. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. I'm so scared, she whispered. What if he can't forgive me? I reached across the table to take her hand, feeling the tremors that ran through her. Jake loves you, I reminded her, but he deserves the truth, and you deserve the chance to get better, for yourself and for your family. Amber took a shuddering breath, then nodded slowly. You're right, she said, her voice small but determined. I'll tell him everything tonight, and I'll get help. I promise. As I watched her walk out the door, shoulders slumped in defeat, I could only hope that it wasn't too late for her, or for the family she had so nearly destroyed with her lies. The sound of the front door slamming jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 2:37 a.m. My heart sank as I heard Jake's heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, knowing that Amber must have finally confessed her gambling addiction to him. I pulled on my robe and hurried out into the hallway, nearly colliding with Doug. We exchanged a worried look before Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of anger and betrayal. Did you know? He demanded, his voice shaking. Did you know about Amber's gambling problem? I hesitated, not wanting to lie to my son, but also reluctant to admit the truth. She told us earlier today, I said carefully. We encouraged her to come clean to you. Jake let out a harsh laugh. Well, she certainly did that, right after I found a letter from some bookie threatening to break my kneecaps if she didn't pay up. Doug sucked in a sharp breath. Jesus, Jake, I'm so sorry. We had no idea it had gotten that bad. Bad? Jake echoed incredulously. It's a fucking disaster. My wife has been lying to me for months, stealing money from her own family to feed her addiction. And now we're in debt up to our eyeballs with no way out. I reached out to touch his arm, but he jerked away from me. Jake, please. Amber needs help. She's sick. She's a liar and a thief, he spat. I don't even know who she is anymore. The venom in his voice made me flinch. I had never seen my son so angry, so hurt. It broke my heart to think of the pain Amber had caused him. What are you going to do? Doug asked quietly. Jake ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly exhausted. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back, but we have Caleb to think about. At the mention of their son, I felt a surge of protectiveness. You can't let Amber's mistakes tear your family apart, I urged. Caleb needs both of his parents. Does he? Jake asked bitterly. Does he need a mother who lies and steals and puts her own selfish desires above her family's well-being? I opened my mouth to argue, but Doug cut me off with a sharp look. That's not your decision to make, Tina, he said firmly. Jake and Amber need to work this out for themselves. Jake nodded, his jaw clenched tight. I need some time to think, he said. I can't even look at her right now without wanting to scream. Why don't you stay here tonight? I offered. Give yourself some space to clear your head. For a moment I thought he might refuse, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. Yeah, okay, he agreed. Thanks, Mom. As I watched him disappear into the guest room, I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. I wanted so badly to fix this for him, to take away his pain and anger. But I knew that this was a battle he would have to fight on his own. I turned to Doug, seeing the same worry and frustration etched on his face. What are we going to do? I asked softly. He sighed heavily. We support them, he said. Both of them. and we pray like hell that they find a way through this mess." I nodded, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult for Jake and Amber, but I also knew that as a family, we would face it together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The tension in the air was palpable as Doug and I sat across from Jake at the kitchen table the next morning. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. I pushed a mug of coffee towards him, but he ignored it, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "Have you heard from Amber?" I asked gently, breaking the heavy silence. Jake shook his head. "No, and I don't want to. Not until I've figured out what I'm going to do." Doug leaned forward, his expression grim. "I know you're hurting, son, but you need to think about Caleb in all this. He needs his mother." "Does he?" Jake asked bitterly. "What kind of mother lies and steals from her own family? What kind of example is that setting for him?" I flinched at the harshness in his voice. "Jake, addiction is a disease. Amber needs help, not condemnation." "She should have thought of that before she started gambling away our future," he snapped. "Before she put our son at risk with her selfish behavior." Doug's face darkened. "I agree. Amber's actions are inexcusable, and if it were up to me, I'd say you should cut her loose and never look back." "Doug," I gasped, shocked by his callousness. "How can you say that? She's your daughter-in-law, the mother of your grandson." He shrugged, unmoved. "She stopped being family the moment she betrayed Jake's trust. As far as I'm concerned, he owes her nothing." Jake looked torn, his eyes darting between us. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I love Amber, but I don't know if I can ever trust her again. And Caleb, he needs stability, not a mother who could relapse at any moment." "So fight for custody," Doug urged. "Get a good lawyer and make sure Amber never has the chance to hurt Caleb again." I stared at my husband in disbelief. How could he be so cold, so unforgiving? Yes, Amber had made a terrible mistake, but she was still a part of our family, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing her completely. "Please, Jake," I begged, "don't make any rash decisions. Amber is getting help. She's trying to make things right." He shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. "I don't know if I can forgive her, Mom. Not after everything she's done." "At least give her a chance to explain," I pleaded. "Hear her out before you do anything drastic." For a long moment, Jake was silent. Then finally he nodded. "Fine, I'll talk to her, but I'm not making any promises." Relief washed over me, even as Doug shot me a disapproving look. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult for all of us, but I couldn't give up on Amber, not when she needed us most. As Jake left to go confront his wife, I turned to Doug, my eyes narrowed. "How could you be so cruel?" I demanded. "Amber is family. We can't just turn our backs on her." "She stopped being family the moment she betrayed us," he said coldly. "And if Jake has any sense, he'll cut her out of his life for good." I shook my head, feeling a surge of anger and disappointment. "I never thought I'd see the day when you'd be so heartless," I said. "Amber needs our support, not our condemnation." Doug's face hardened. "She needs to face the consequences of her actions. And if that means losing her husband and son, then so be it." As he stalked out of the room, I felt a chill run down my spine. I had always known my husband to be a stern man, but never cruel. Now, I couldn't help but wonder if I even recognized the person he had become, or if our family would ever be the same again. The days following Jake and Amber's confrontation were tense and uncomfortable. My son had agreed to give his wife one more chance, but the trust between them had been shattered. I could see the strain on both their faces, the way they avoided each other's eyes and spoke in clipped, formal tones. I tried my best to be supportive, offering to watch Caleb so they could have time to talk things through. But every time I brought up the subject of Amber's addiction, Jake would shut down, his jaw clenching with barely suppressed anger. It was during one of these conversations that I made a shocking discovery. I was tidying up Doug's home office, sorting through the piles of paperwork that had accumulated on his desk, when I stumbled across a series of bank statements. At first glance, they seemed innocuous enough, but as I looked closer, I felt my blood run cold. There, in black and white, were a series of withdrawals from our joint savings account, thousands of dollars, all funneled into an account I didn't recognize. And the dates. They went back months, long before Amber's gambling addiction had come to light. With shaking hands, I confronted Doug that evening. "What is this?" I demanded, thrusting the statements at him. "Where has all this money been going?" For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then his expression hardened. "That's none of your concern, Tina. I'm handling it." "Handling what?" I pressed. "Doug, this is our money. Our future. You can't just take it without telling me." He sighed heavily, running a hand over his face. "Fine. If you must know, I've been giving Amber money to help pay off her debts." I stared at him in disbelief. "What? Why would you do that? We agreed to let Jake and Amber handle this on their own." "Because I don't trust her," Doug said bluntly. "I've been keeping tabs on her, making sure she's not falling back into old habits, and when I saw how much she owed, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." Anger surged through me, hot and bright. "So you went behind my back? Behind Jake's back? Doug, how could you?" "I did what I had to do to protect our family," he snapped. "Amber's addiction has already caused enough damage. I won't let her drag us down with her." I shook my head, feeling sick to my stomach. "This isn't protection, Doug. It's enabling. You're not helping Amber. You're just making it easier for her to keep gambling." "That's not true," he argued. "I've been making her give me receipts, proof that she's using the money to pay off her debts. I'm keeping her accountable." "And what happens when Jake finds out?" I demanded. "What happens when he realizes that his own father has been lying to him, just like Amber has?" Doug's face paled. "He won't find out, because you're not going to tell him." I let out a harsh laugh. "You really expect me to keep this a secret from our son? Doug, this is wrong. You know it is." "What's wrong is letting Amber destroy our family," he said coldly. "And if keeping this secret is what it takes to prevent that, then so be it." I stared at him, hardly recognizing the man I had married, the man I had loved for over 40 years. In that moment, I realized that Doug's obsession with controlling Amber had blinded him to the damage he was causing, and I knew that if I didn't put a stop to it, our family might never recover. "No," I said firmly. "I won't be a part of this, not anymore. Amber needs help, not more lies and deceit, and if you can't see that, then I don't know what else to say to you." As I turned and walked away, I felt a heaviness in my heart that I had never known before. I had always believed that Doug and I were a team, that we could face anything together, but now I wasn't so sure. And that uncertainty terrified me more than anything else. The weeks that followed were some of the most difficult of my life. Doug and I barely spoke, the tension between us thick and suffocating. I threw myself into caring for Caleb, trying to provide some sense of normalcy for my grandson in the midst of all the chaos. But even that small comfort was shattered when Jake showed up at our door one evening, his face pale and drawn. "Amber's gone," he said, his voice hollow. "She left a note saying she couldn't take the pressure anymore, that she needed to get away and clear her head." My heart sank as I saw the pain in my son's eyes. "Oh, Jake, I'm so sorry. Do you have any idea where she might have gone?" He shook his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "No, she didn't say, but I think she might have relapsed. I found some new gambling receipts in her purse before she left." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. After everything we had been through, all the lies and betrayal, Amber had thrown away her second chance. And now my son and grandson were left to pick up the pieces. Over the next few days, I did my best to support Jake as he tried to track down his missing wife. He called every casino and racetrack in the area, hoping someone had seen her. But as the days stretched into weeks with no sign of Amber, I could see the hope draining from his eyes. It was during one of these fruitless searches that I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Jake was on the phone with one of Amber's old gambling buddies, his voice tight with anger and frustration. "What do you mean? She's planning to leave the state. Where is she going?" he demanded. There was a pause, then Jake's face turned ashen. "She's taking Caleb with her?" "No, no way in hell. She can't do that. Not without my permission." My heart seized with fear as I realized the depths of Amber's desperation. She wasn't just running away from her problems anymore. She was trying to kidnap her own son. I knew then that I had to do something. I couldn't let Amber destroy Jake's life any more than she already had, and I certainly couldn't let her take Caleb away from the only stable home he had ever known. So I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I called the police and reported Amber's plans, telling them everything I knew about her gambling addiction and the threats she had made against my family. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, betraying my own daughter-in-law like that. But I knew in my heart that it was the right thing to do. Caleb's safety had to come first, no matter what the cost. When the police arrived at Jake and Amber's house later that day, they found her in the midst of packing her bags, a confused and frightened Caleb by her side. She was arrested on the spot, charged with attempted kidnapping and child endangerment. I watched from the sidelines as they led her away in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Jake stood nearby, his expression unreadable, as he held Caleb close. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice choked with tears. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let her take Caleb away from you." For a long moment, Jake was silent. Then he turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "You did the right thing, Mom. I know it wasn't easy, but you protected Caleb. That's all that matters." As I watched the police car drive away, Amber's face pressed against the window in despair. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction wash over me. She had brought this on herself, with her lies and her selfish choices, and now she would face the consequences. But even as I tried to convince myself that justice had been served, I couldn't shake the feeling that our family would never be the same again, that the wounds Amber had inflicted might never fully heal. The days following Amber's arrest were a blur of police interviews, legal meetings, and hushed conversations behind closed doors. Jake was a wreck, torn between his anger at his wife's betrayal and his fear for Caleb's well-being. I did my best to support him, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. It was during one of these tense discussions that I finally learned the full extent of Amber's plans. According to the police, she had been secretly funneling money into a private bank account for months, stockpiling cash for her eventual escape. And she had planned to take Caleb with her, fleeing the state and starting a new life somewhere far away from the consequences of her actions. The thought of losing my grandson forever made my blood run cold. I knew then that I had made the right decision in turning Amber in, no matter how much it hurt to betray her trust. But even as I tried to convince myself that I had done the right thing, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of guilt that plagued me. What if I had been too harsh on Amber? What if I had pushed her to this point with my constant criticism and judgment? These thoughts weighed heavily on my mind as I sat in the courtroom, watching as Amber was led in wearing handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. She looked small and fragile, her once vibrant eyes now dull and lifeless. As the judge read out the charges against her, I saw a flicker of something in Amber's expression. Not remorse or regret, but a cold, calculating anger that made my skin crawl. And then, to my horror, she turned to face Jake and Caleb, her lips curling into a sneer. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can just cast me aside and move on with your lives? Well, think again." Jake recoiled as if he had been slapped, his face draining of color. Caleb whimpered and buried his face in his father's shoulder, too young to understand the cruel words being hurled at him. "I'll get out of here eventually," Amber continued, her eyes flashing with malice. "And when I do, I'll come for my son. I'll take him away from you, and you'll never see him again. That's a promise." The courtroom erupted into chaos, with the judge banging his gavel and ordering Amber to be removed from the room. But even as the bailiffs dragged her away, her words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt sick to my stomach as I watched Jake try to comfort a sobbing Caleb. How could Amber be so cruel, so selfish? How could she threaten to take away the one thing that mattered most to her own child? In that moment, I knew that I had to do everything in my power to protect my grandson, to make sure that Amber never had the chance to hurt him again. So I made a vow, right then and there. I would fight for Caleb no matter what it took. I would make sure that he grew up in a safe and loving home, surrounded by people who truly cared for him. And as for Amber, well, she had made her choices. She had chosen her addiction over her family, her own selfish desires over the well-being of her child. And now she would have to live with the consequences. As I left the courtroom that day, my heart heavy with grief and anger, I knew that our family would never be the same again. But I also knew that we would survive this, somehow. We would pick up the pieces and move forward, one day at a time. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would be there for Jake and Caleb. Always. The years that followed Amber's sentencing were a time of healing and rebuilding for our family. Jake threw himself into his work, determined to provide a stable life for Caleb, and I did my best to be there for both of them, offering love and support whenever they needed it. But even as we tried to move forward, the specter of Amber's betrayal hung over us like a dark cloud. Caleb in particular struggled with the loss of his mother. He would often wake up crying in the middle of the night, calling out for her in his sleep. It broke my heart to see my grandson in so much pain, but I knew that we had made the right decision in cutting Amber out of our lives. She had proven time and again that she was not capable of being a good mother or a trustworthy partner. Still, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt whenever I thought about the role I had played in tearing our family apart. If I had been more understanding, more supportive of Amber's struggles, could things have turned out differently? These thoughts plagued me as I watched Jake and Caleb slowly rebuild their lives. Jake started dating again, eventually meeting a kind and loving woman named Sarah, who accepted Caleb as her own. And Caleb, with the help of therapy and a stable home life, began to thrive in school and make new friends. But even as our family healed and grew, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing, that there was a piece of our hearts that would always belong to Amber, no matter how much we tried to forget her. It all came to a head one day when I was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic. I stumbled across a photo album from Jake and Amber's wedding day, their smiling faces beaming up at me from the pages. As I flipped through the pictures, memories of happier times flooding back, I felt a sudden wave of emotion wash over me. Anger, sadness, regret, it all came rushing back in a tidal wave of grief. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, the phone rang. It was Amber, calling from prison. She had been granted early release for good behavior and wanted to see Caleb. I felt my heart constrict with fear and anger as I listened to her plead her case. How dare she, after everything she had put us through? How could she possibly think that we would let her back into our lives? But as I listened to the desperation in her voice, the genuine remorse and longing, I felt something inside me soften. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for redemption. Maybe Amber had truly changed and was ready to be the mother Caleb deserved. I knew it was a risk. I knew that Jake would be furious with me for even considering it. But in that moment, I made a decision that would change all of our lives once again. I agreed to let Amber see Caleb, under strict supervision and with the understanding that she would have to prove herself worthy of a place in his life. It was a gamble, a leap of faith, but one that I felt compelled to take. As I hung up the phone, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and hope, I knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks and challenges, moments of doubt and pain. But I also knew that if there was even a chance of bringing our family back together, of healing the wounds that had torn us apart, I had to try. For Caleb's sake, for Jake's sake, and for the sake of the love that had once bound us all together. And so, with a deep breath and a silent prayer, I prepared myself for the journey ahead. A journey of forgiveness, of second chances, and of the power of a mother's love to overcome even the darkest of betrayals.